In 1923, on a farm outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania, an Amish elder, named only in county agricultural records as S. Byler, was doing something that most of his English neighbors had already forgotten. He was not buying anything. He was not driving to a feed store, not ordering from a catalog, not waiting on a delivery. He was walking a system, a living, self-feeding, closed-loop food system that his grandfather had brought from Europe in the 1840s, and that, according to historians who have documented Lancaster County farming traditions, had been producing food on the same soil for nearly 8 decades without a single purchased input. Big Ag has spent the better part of a century making sure you never hear that story. Today, you are going to hear it. What you are about to discover is not a gardening tip. It is not a trick from a weekend homesteading blog. It is a documented, practiced, 2,400-year-old system of food production that Amish communities across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana have quietly maintained, while the rest of America was told loudly, expensively, and repeatedly that without synthetic fertilizers, without patented seeds, and without chemical intervention, your garden would fail. The open question, the one this video is going to answer before the last second, is this. Exactly what is this system? How does it actually work at the biological level? And why would an industry worth hundreds of billions of dollars need to bury something that costs you nothing? Hold that question. Because the answer is going to reframe everything you think you know about your own backyard. Picture a farm in Lancaster County on an early October morning. The air carries that particular smell, dark, wet, almost sweet, that anyone who has ever turned good compost knows immediately. It is not the sharp chemical smell of a fertilized lawn. It is something older, something alive. On that farm, the soil has been worked by the same family for 5 generations, and if you kneel down and push your fingers into it, it does not compact. It gives. It breathes. That texture, that living, sponge-like quality, is not an accident. It is the product of a system that has no modern brand name because it was never sold to anyone. Ethnographer John Hostetler, whose landmark work Amish Society was first published in 1963 and went through 4 editions with Johns Hopkins University Press, spent years documenting exactly how Amish farming communities maintained their land without external inputs. What he found was not primitive. What he found was precise. Amish farmers, particularly in Lancaster County, operated their land as what agricultural historians call a closed nutrient loop, a system in which every output of the farm became an input for the farm. Nothing left the cycle, nothing was wasted, and the soil, decade after decade, did not deplete, it improved. And here is what the industry spent decades hoping you would never figure out. The roots of this system are not even Amish in origin. They trace back to ancient agricultural communities in the Levant and Central Asia, documented by Roman agricultural writers including Columella in the 1st century, later refined by Germanic farming communities in the Rhineland, the exact communities from which the Amish and Mennonite founders emigrated to Pennsylvania beginning in the early 1700s. When Bishop Hans Hare arrived in Lancaster County in 1710, he brought seeds, but he also brought a system, a way of managing soil, livestock, water, and crop rotation that had already been tested for centuries across climates far more demanding than Pennsylvania. Donald Craybill, professor emeritus at Elizabethtown College and one of the most respected scholars of Amish culture in America, has written extensively about how Amish agricultural practices are not frozen in time, but are deliberately selected. Craybill's research makes clear that Amish communities adopt or reject technology based on whether it strengthens or weakens community interdependence and self-sufficiency. And what that means for your garden is this. Every method the Amish kept, they kept on purpose. Every practice they refused because they had watched it fail someone else first. Now here is where the story turns. And you are going to want to stay with this, because this is the part of American agricultural history that does not appear in the USDA brochures. By the late 1940s, the American chemical industry had a problem. It was a problem born from victory. During World War II, American factories had been retooled at enormous scale to produce nitrogen-based compounds for explosives and nerve agents. When the war ended in 1945, those factories were still standing. The machinery was still running. The workforce was still employed. And the chemical companies, DuPont, American Cyanamid, others, needed to redirect that production towards something they could sell in peacetime. The answer, dressed up in the language of progress and abundance, was synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. Ammonium nitrate, once a component of bombs, was reformulated and marketed to American farmers as the future of food. This was not a conspiracy. It was economics. But the effect was the same as a conspiracy would have been. Within 15 years, the entire infrastructure of American agriculture had been reshaped around purchased inputs. Seed companies, fertilizer manufacturers, and pesticide producers, many of them the same companies or subsidiaries of the same companies, worked in alignment with federal agricultural policy to transform the independent American farmer into a customer. And not a casual customer, a dependent one. Earl Butz became Secretary of Agriculture under President Nixon in 1971. His directive to American farmers became infamous in rural communities and is still cited today by agricultural historians. Get big or get out. Butz pushed a policy of industrialization and consolidation that actively discouraged small, diversified farms and rewarded monoculture production scaled to industrial processing. Farms that had fed families for generations were absorbed into operations that fed corporations. The system Butz promoted required purchased fertilizers, purchased seeds, purchased pesticides, and it made those purchases so deeply embedded in the economics of American farming that the alternative, the old closed-loop self-sufficient method, became not just unfashionable, but structurally penalized. If you have a garden and you are tired of being told what to buy every single season, drop the number 47 inches the comments right now. Or even better, tell us what state you are gardening in. Let's see how many of us are still out here, still working our own ground. What the Amish did while all of this was happening is something that deserves to be said plainly. They watched it, they evaluated it, and they declined. A 73-year-old Amish farmer in Holmes County, Ohio, a county that by documented census records contains one of the highest concentrations of Amish population in the world, uses the same composting and soil feeding method his grandfather used in 1898. His soil tests, taken by a county extension agent who visited his farm in recent years, showed organic matter levels between 6 and 8%. The national average for American farmland, according to USDA data, has fallen to roughly 1 to 2%. His yields, measured per acre, match or exceed his conventionally farming neighbors, who spend thousands of dollars annually on inputs he does not buy. When the extension agent asked him what products he used, he reportedly pointed at his barn, at his animals, at his compost pile, and said nothing else needed. Now, let's talk about the actual mechanism, because this is the part that makes everything click. And this is the moment everything changed for the people who first understood it clearly. The system is built on a biological truth that the synthetic fertilizer industry spent decades trying to obscure. Soil is not a medium, it is an organism, a living community of bacteria, fungi, nematodes, earthworms, and microorganisms so complex that a single teaspoon of healthy Amish farmland contains more living organisms than there are people on Earth. What synthetic nitrogen fertilizers do, what they actually do at the chemical level, is feed plants directly while bypassing and eventually destroying that biological community. It is the agricultural equivalent of feeding someone through an IV for 20 years. The muscles atrophy. The system forgets how to feed itself. The closed-loop system the Amish maintain works in the opposite direction. It feeds the soil, and the soil feeds the plant. The vehicle is compost, but not the casual bag from the garden center kind. Amish compost is a managed, multi-layer, hot-fermented mixture of animal manure, crop residues, wood ash, kitchen waste, and in some communities, specific mineral amendments sourced locally. Lancaster County Amish farmers have traditionally added limestone from local quarries to balance pH, a practice documented by agricultural historians studying Pennsylvania German farming traditions, going back to the 1750. The pile heats to temperatures between 130 and 160 degrees Fahrenheit, which kills weed seeds and pathogens while preserving and multiplying beneficial microbial populations. The result, after 8 to 12 weeks of managed turning, is a substance that independently analyzed soil scientists have described as functionally irreplaceable. But the part they really did not want you to know comes next, because the heat is only half of it. The real value is what happens in the final curing stage, the last 4 to 6 weeks, when the pile cools and the fungal networks establish themselves. This is when the mycorrhizal fungi colonize the compost, creating the thread-like structures that, when introduced to garden soil, extend a plant's effective root system by up to 1,000%. This is not folklore. This is documented plant biology, published in peer-reviewed journals and confirmed by university research going back decades. Mycorrhizal networks allow plants to access phosphorus, water, and trace minerals from volumes of soil far beyond what their physical roots can reach. Plants grown in mycorrhizal-rich compost-amended soil consistently outperform plants grown in synthetic fertilizer on multiple metrics: drought resistance, disease resistance, nutritional density, and long-term yield stability. The synthetic fertilizer does not support mycorrhizal activity. In many concentrations, it actively suppresses it. This is not an accident of chemistry. This is a structural incompatibility between the industrial model and the living soil model, and it was understood by plant scientists as early as the 1960s. The question of whether the industry understood this incompatibility and proceeded anyway is one that the historical record does not answer with complete clarity. But it does record that the investment in synthetic fertilizer infrastructure continued to grow year after year as soil organic matter across American farmland continued to decline. If you have not subscribed to this channel yet, take a moment to do it now. Every week we bring you videos like this one: the methods the industry buried, the wisdom the Amish kept alive, and the kind of food independence that most Americans gave up without ever being asked if that was what they wanted. Now, about the title of this video, about the word outlawed, because you may have been waiting for that, and it deserves a careful and honest answer. No single federal law was passed that said the Amish compost system is illegal. That is not how institutional power works when it wants to marginalize something. What happened was subtler, more durable, and in many ways more effective than an outright ban. Beginning in the 1950s, federal agricultural policy, written by agencies that received substantial input from the very chemical companies that stood to benefit, began structuring farm support programs, crop insurance incentives, and rural development loans around industrial farming practices. To qualify for federal support, you needed to be using approved inputs, following approved protocols, operating at approved scales. Small diversified farms, using closed-loop organic methods, were not excluded by name. They were simply made economically unviable by a system of incentives that rewarded their competitors. A landmark legal case in a different but adjacent arena illustrates how this system works. Bowman v. Monsanto, decided by the United States Supreme Court in 2013. Vernon Hugh Bowman, a 75-year-old Indiana soybean farmer, planted commodity soybeans, purchased from a grain elevator. Soybeans he did not buy directly from Monsanto, and found himself in a federal lawsuit because those soybeans happened to carry Monsanto's patented Roundup Ready trait. The court ruled unanimously against Bowman. The principle established: a farmer can be legally liable for a seed's genetic content even when that farmer did not purchase that seed from the patent holder. What that ruling made clear to every small farmer paying attention was that the direction of legal travel, over decades, had been consistently away from farmer autonomy and toward corporate control of the food supply at its most fundamental level, the seed itself. The Amish solution to this, practiced generations before the Roundup Ready era, is seed saving. And it is exactly as simple and exactly as radical as it sounds. In LaGrange County, Indiana, the second largest Amish settlement in America, farmers have maintained open-pollinated seed lines for varieties of corn, beans, squash, and tomatoes that trace their genetic lineage back to European varieties brought by their ancestors in the 1700s and supplemented by trade with Native American communities in the 1800s. These are not heritage seeds purchased online. These are living genetic libraries passed from hand to hand, generation to generation, stored in paper envelopes in cool, dry barns, selected annually for the traits that matter most to a family feeding itself: flavor, storage quality, drought tolerance, and yield in local soil conditions. No patent covers them, no corporation controls them, no price increase can make them inaccessible. Your grandfather knew this. If he had a garden in the 1940s or 1950s, there is a very real chance he saved seed. There is a real chance he composted. There is a real chance his soil was better than yours is today, not because he worked harder, but because he had not yet been told he needed to buy what his land could produce on its own. What happened between his generation and yours is not a story of agricultural progress. It is a story of manufactured dependency. And the Amish, in their quiet and deliberate way, simply chose not to participate. What the Amish discovered about this system is going to change how you look at your own garden forever. Because the infinite food system of the title, the thing that this video has been building toward, is not a trick, not a device, not a product. It is a principle. The principle is this: a farm or a garden that is managed as a closed loop, in which compost feeds soil, soil feeds plants, plants feed animals, animals feed compost, and seed is saved to restart the cycle does not require external inputs. It does not run out, it does not deplete, it does not depend on a supply chain, a corporation, a government subsidy, or a favorable growing season in a country you have never visited. It depends on you, your land, your animals, your attention, and your willingness to manage the living system you already have. 2,400 years ago, Greek agricultural writers were documenting this cycle. Roman writers formalized it. Germanic farmers carried it through centuries of conflict and climate change. The founders of Amish communities brought it to Pennsylvania soil in the early 18th century, and it has been working, quietly, on Lancaster County and Holmes County and LaGrange County farms every single season, while the rest of American agriculture borrowed money to buy products that made the soil progressively less capable of growing food without more products. Here is the uncomfortable truth that the historical record supports without any embellishment required. The soil on a well-managed Amish farm that has never received a synthetic fertilizer application is, by measurable scientific metrics, more productive per unit of effort over a 40-year horizon than conventionally managed American farmland. Not in every single season, not in peak yield of a single commodity crop in a single ideal year, but in sustained, reliable, nutritionally dense food production across generations in the kind of productivity that actually matters when you are trying to feed a family from your own land year after year without depending on anyone else. The old system wins. The closed loop wins. The method that costs nothing wins against the method that costs everything. And that, right there, is the reason it had to be marginalized. Because a farming system that costs nothing produces customers that never need to buy anything. And an agricultural economy built on the sale of inputs, seeds, fertilizers, pesticides, fungicides, herbicides, cannot survive a nation of farmers who do not need to buy inputs. This is where the open loop from the beginning of this video closes. What S. Byler was doing in 1923 on that farm outside Intercourse, Pennsylvania, was not primitive. He was operating a system of such biological sophistication that modern soil science has spent decades reverse engineering its mechanisms. He was maintaining mycorrhizal soil networks that university researchers now understand to be essential to plant health. He was saving seed lines of genetic diversity that plant biologists now recognize as irreplaceable. He was managing a nutrient cycle that agronomists now describe using terms like regenerative and sustainable, terms that, when you think about it, are simply modern language for what your grandfather already knew and what the Amish never stopped doing. The system was never actually outlawed. It was buried by a slower, quieter, more effective mechanism: convenience. You were handed a bag of fertilizer, told it was progress, and the alternative was allowed to become invisible. The Amish made a different choice. And every harvest season, on every Amish farm in Lancaster County and Holmes County and LaGrange County, that choice produces food, good food, food grown from saved seed in living soil with no invoice attached. You can make that choice too. You do not need 40 acres. You do not need draft horses. You do not need to reject modernity wholesale. You need a compost pile managed with the same intention an Amish farmer manages it: hot, layered, turned on schedule, cured completely. You need soil that you feed before you plant in it. You need seeds saved from your best plants each autumn, dried, stored, protected. You need to understand that your garden is not a plot of dirt that needs products. It is a living system that needs stewardship. That is the entire revolution, and it fits in your backyard. Leave a comment below